hey, life can change in an instant, and that can feel especially true in the holiday and winter months. One moment everything feels normal, and the next someone else's mistake turns your world upside down. That's why you need a team you can count on. NACE Law Group has been standing up for DC families for decades, fighting for neighbors hurt by medical malpractice, wrongful deaths, and serious injuries. They don't just settle quickly or push papers. They dig in, fight hard, and make sure every client gets the justice they deserve. And here's something we love. They're a longtime supporter of CityCast because just like us, they care about this community and the people who call it home. So if you or someone you care about has been hurt this season, don't wait. Call NACE Law Group. They'll stand with you, fight for your family, and make sure your rights are protected so you can focus on what matters most. Visit WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com. That's WashingtonDCInjuryLawyers.com.
Today on CityCast DC, after the tragic attack on 2 National Guard members that left one of them dead and the other fighting for his life in the hospital, the Trump administration quickly announced plans to put 500 additional National Guard troops on DC streets, this time with DC police accompanying them for protection. All of this while there are still so many unanswered questions about what exactly happened in this attack. The Washington Post's Olivia George joins to tell us what we do know. Today's Tuesday, December 2nd. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. Olivia, welcome back to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I'm sure you've seen by now that 2 National Guard members were shot near the White House last week. What exactly do we know about what happened so far?
So it was Wednesday afternoon, about a block, as you mentioned, from the White House in downtown D.C., when 2 young National Guard members doing routine patrols outside of a metro station were shot in this, brazen, close-range attack, the reverberations of which pretty swiftly, spread through the city and through the highest halls of power. One of those young National Guard members has subsequently passed away. The other, I believe, at least as of last night, was fighting for his life in the hospital.
Wow, what do we know about the victims? Who were they?
Both of them were members of the West Virginia National Guard. The member who has already passed away, Sarah Beckstrom, she was 20 years old. I believe she joined the Guard right after graduating from high school. So she'd been with the Guard for about 2 years. One of my colleagues was able to speak with a former boyfriend of hers who described that she was initially somewhat reluctant to be in DC, but really believed in the stated mission of improving public safety in the nation's capital. The other, as I mentioned, Andrew Wolf, also with the West Virginia National Guard. He came from a family that was dedicated to service, according to the West Virginia governor. He became a Guard member in early 2019. Both National Guard members have been praised for their courage, their patriotism, their commitment to service.
Yeah, it makes me sad that one of the National Guard members who was murdered was already expressing reservations and doubts about being here in DC. I mean, it just really sort of underscores what a tragedy this is, that 1, any loss of life, but particularly somebody so young, and 2, somebody who already said, I'm not really sure why I'm here.
So my understanding is that she, initially wasn't thrilled about the idea of being deployed to DC, nervous about leaving her family, her ex-boyfriend said, but she really believed in this mission of, hoping to reduce crime in DC. I think you bring up an important point, and it's something that my colleagues and I have been paying close attention to, is that really from the inception of this deployment mission, of bringing not just the DC National Guard into city streets, but National Guard members from a handful of states around the country. officials were cognizant, at least, of the potential risk and the kind of potentially politically charged atmosphere that National Guard members would be entering into. The DC Attorney General in September sued the Trump administration over the deployment of the National Guard. And one of the central arguments or points that they bring up in that lawsuit is about safety concerns and the kind of turning up of the temperature that can occur when you have military personnel in an urban setting, in city streets that they might not be familiar with. They might not have had, the usual training in community policing, et cetera, et cetera. And through that lawsuit, we've been able to obtain and review a lot of internal documents from the National Guard where officials in their own language, are describing that this could be, potential opportunity for criminals or violent extremists, and that there are risks associated with such a deployment.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned that court proceeding. I'm no lawyer, but if a court told the Trump administration that they weren't allowed to have these National Guard troops in D.C. anymore, and they continued to have them there, were those troops lawfully there at that point?
So back in November, a federal judge basically ordered that the Trump administration halt their National Guard deployment in D.C. while a lawsuit over that matter plays out in court. But it's important to note that order didn't take effect for 21 days, basically giving the Trump administration time to appeal the decision. I believe that order to halt the deployment was supposed to take effect December 11th, so we haven't reached that date yet. And as expected in the interim, the Trump administration has appealed the federal judge's decision, and we are awaiting an update in that case. We, in the next couple days, I think, are expecting an update because the Trump administration had asked effectively for an expedited appeal decision.
One of DC's most popular holiday traditions returns with an all-new edition. Come join the Gay Men's Chorus of Washington, D.C. as they ring in the season with The Holiday Show. This year, the holiday extravaganza is bigger than ever with new soulful arrangements of your favorite holiday carols. The reindeer will be high-kicking and the snowflakes will sparkle. Songs include Oh Holy Night, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Let It Snow, We Wish You the Merriest, and Go Tell It on the Mountain. The Holiday Show, December 13th, 14th, and 20th, only at Lincoln Theater. These shows always sell out, so get your tickets soon. ASL tickets and groups of 10 or more, call 202-293-1548. Get your tickets at gmcw.org. That's gmcw.org.
Stories matter at St. Anne's Center, where mothers and children can overcome homelessness and write hopeful new futures. Founded in D.C. in 1860 and chartered by President Lincoln, St. Anne's Center continues to help women and their children today, 165 years on. Now, we invite you for a one-of-a-kind look inside our mission. Visit stanns.org/CityCastDC to watch In Her Words, an exclusive short film highlighting 4 women currently journeying through St. Anne's Center. This 6-minute film explores motherhood, homelessness, and hope through the eyes of the women living the journey. Hear their stories in their words. You can also learn how to support St. Anne's by advocating, donating, or volunteering for the mission. Make a difference this Homelessness Awareness Month. Visit stanns.org/CityCastDC. So in the meantime, how has this shooting immediately impacted D.C. and the National Guard presence here?
So we're feeling its impact, I think, in a couple different ways. One, I'll flag a pretty substantial shift in how the National Guard will be operating in D.C. Up until sort of last week, troops were largely unaccompanied by police officers when they went about their patrols in the city. But my colleagues and I reported last week that in the wake of that tragic attack, members of the DC Police Department would be paired with National Guard troops on their patrols. And I think it's an important turning point. If enacted on a long-term basis, it marks a significant shift in the way that troops have been working with law enforcement. Up until now, Trump administration officials have really credited the troops with helping to reduce crime in the city. In part, they argue, because the troops, presence at metro stations, around our monuments, etc., free up the time of local law enforcement to direct their resources and finite time elsewhere. But now we're seeing local police accompanying Guard members, which essentially does the opposite. Though I'll note, I'm told that the members of the DC Police Department who will be working with the National Guard will be, pulling from their overtime pay, rather with the idea being that they'll still, they won't be pulled away from their existing responsibilities and duties.
Olivia, I'm sure you can't speak to this, but you see how that doesn't make any sense, right? Like, the idea that we've got that our city is so infested with violent crime that we need National Guard to patrol it. National Guard are not safe to do that themselves, so we need to pull from our city's police force to protect the National Guard while they patrol. I know you didn't set this up, but I'm not crazy. That makes no sense, right?
I think, when we published this story, providing some details into this shift in arrangement, this shift in policy last week, there was a pretty swift outcry among some residents who shed a similar perspective to the one you've just articulated, that really view this as kind of wasteful and hypocritical, etc. I'll note too that I think during the first news conference, right in the wake of the tragedy, the mayor was asked whether the shooting of the two National Guard members kind of proved that there was a need for their presence in DC, that there was violence, that this kind of larger federal presence, there was violence that deemed this not larger federal presence kind of necessary. And she responded, I'm paraphrasing here, effectively saying that this was like a one-off targeted attack. Also, let's note, not committed by someone who lived here. He drove across the country from Washington State to Washington, D.C. So she, it kind of brushed that aside. And though she has expressed gratitude, the mayor has, for, the boosted presence of federal agents in DC, she's been pretty consistent in her messaging around the National Guard, that she thinks that it is a waste of resources and not a wise or a necessary decision for them to be here.
Yeah, I kind of see where she's coming from here. What else do we know about this suspect?
So he is in the hospital at the moment, at least the last that I've heard. We are awaiting clarity on when he might be arraigned in the coming days. He is a 29-year-old man from Afghanistan, I believe father of 5, who came to the United States after Afghanistan fell to the Taliban in 2021. He worked for the CIA organized counterterrorism outfit in Afghanistan, and as I mentioned, came here in 2021 through a program under the Biden administration called Operation Allies Welcome, that basically helps resettle Afghan nationals after the U.S. military withdrawal. And he'd been living in a small apartment in Washington State.
So I've heard, as I'm sure you have, a lot of bluster from Trump himself sort of saying, oh, the reason this person was able to be in the United States in the first place was Biden. So is that actually true?
I don't proclaim to be an expert on, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan or this program. He, the suspect, as I mentioned, did come to the U.S. during during the Biden administration in 2021 under this program led by the Biden administration. So while he entered the country under the program that I mentioned during the Biden administration, I'll note also that the Trump administration granted him asylum earlier this year. One of my colleagues spoke to an official with knowledge of the situation who spoke on the condition of anonymity, who described that this suspect was, quote, locked into being in the country as a result of that Biden-era program. But as I said, earlier this year, the Trump administration did grant him asylum.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to sort of what you were getting at earlier. This happened on Wednesday afternoon, and, by Wednesday evening, Thursday morning, we already had the administration talking about, whose fault this was, what happened, these changes to the National Guard presence going forward very quickly. And I was just struck by how we wasted, I don't even feel like I had a sense of what had happened and what was going on before the Trump administration was already talking about, how this was Biden's fault, how we needed more National Guard in D.C. Is there something to be said about the quickness with which we are now sort of rushing to politicize things like this? Like, we don't even get all the details yet. I as a resident here, I don't feel like I have all the details of what happened and why, but yet, if I look out my window, perhaps I'm already seeing the impact with more National Guard on the streets of my community.
On both sides of the political spectrum, we've seen criticisms that the other side has kind of rushed to politicize the tragedy and the death of at least one National Guard member, and the other who continues to fight for his life in hospital. I think that it's noteworthy that within hours of the shooting, we saw Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth say that Trump had asked him for 500 additional troops to the DC mission. But then on Thursday, when asked if he would take any additional security measures for the National Guard troops in the city, Trump replied, quote, "No, I just want to have more."
I mean, that really speaks to what we were just talking about, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this. Are they able to order more National Guard troops on the streets of D.C. while the court has already deemed this unlawful, while they're in this pause before they have to officially pull them while they wait for an appeal?
It definitely seems to be kind of a messy and mucky situation about the extent to which this deployment mission can or should continue. I believe this week we should get an update on the Trump administration's appeal. They were planning to appeal that court order even before the tragedy on Wednesday, and they, as I mentioned, have subsequently done so. So I guess it's just kind of an unsatisfying watch this space. But on the subject of safety, like I said, I mean, this has been communicated, by top officials from the get-go of the deployment mission. Troops have been instructed to take measures like always using the buddy system, changing into civilian clothes when they're off duty. DC police have been conducting additional patrols around the locations where National Guard troops are staying. And so it's just been this, really unfortunate kind of through current or thread through this entire deployment, this concerns about this charged atmosphere and the potential heightened risk for tragedy.
Yeah. And I've seen a lot of folks say, just like, these young people, these National Guard members, they should be at home. They should be, it doesn't make sense for them to be here, cleaning up garbage and just hanging around the metro, that perhaps this is an indication that really they should be at home.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen all matter of conclusions drawn from Wednesday's tragedy. As you mentioned, a lot of people saying that this just underscores the safety concerns and the kind of waste and unnecessary military might that is being deployed in DC. I've also seen people point to Wednesday's attack as reason, for why the National Guard and federal law enforcement are needed in this city. I'll note, too, that there are still a lot of unanswered questions about the suspect's motive in this case. I'm hoping that in the next few days, we will be able to glean more from court records that will hopefully be filed soon. But there has definitely seemed to be a rush by the, there's definitely seemed to be this kind of rush on all manner of kind of sides of the political spectrum to point to what happened on Wednesday to further a variety of narratives when we still really have a lot of unanswered questions about what happened and how it could happen.
Speaking of unanswered questions, I watched the presser that the administration did with the chief of police here in D.C., where Kash Patel is speaking about what happened. And he says, we're going to get this guy. We're going to find this guy. And then the D.C. chief of police has to step in and say, well, we already have the suspect in custody. I just sort of felt overwhelmed with dread watching that presser. And I think it became especially clear to me as a D.C. resident what it means when you have all of these Trump administration officials really trying to be hands-on in matters that also feel quite local to me as somebody who lives in D.C. Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we see, over the last year, we've seen that kind of dynamic play out in all kinds of ways where issues that, a lot of that are in many ways local and, personal and, kind of emotionally charged are looming very, very large on the national political landscape because of DC's very unique position and lack of statehood. We see, just scores of bills moving through Congress that are laser focused on overhauling aspects of the DC criminal justice system. We see senators and, members of the House who represent, communities in states far, far away from DC talk at length about the changes that they would like to see play out on the local level here. And I think, so this is just, we've really seen like an escalation of, especially when it comes to issues related to crime and criminal justice in DC, in this one city, really be catapulted onto the national political landscape, into the national conversation, both because of DC's stature as the nation's capital and also because of its unique vulnerability. And that moment from the press conference was also interesting to me, in part because it was another example of maybe conflicting is too strong a word, but when you have this overlap between local law enforcement working with this wide variety of federal law enforcement. I mean, we've seen other examples recently where there is either like a miscommunication or some confusion over what happened, or different agencies being held to different standards, whether that's on whether they're allowed to cover their faces or not, or, whether they just those types of identifying. We've seen just this kind of tidal wave of like conflicting practices because of all these different jurisdictions and like different chains of command.
Have we heard anything from the city council about this?
That's a great question. I mean, beyond kind of additional remarks that I saw on social media right in the aftermath, where members were expressing their condolences. I haven't been in touch with any of them, so I don't know what the latest is on that front. We did, of course, see Janice Lewis-George announce her candidacy for mayor. And in her campaign video that she circulated online, one of the kind of key pitches that she makes is like, I'm a fighter. I want to fight for DC, and DC is worthy of being fought for. And it's hard to view those statements as unrelated to kind of the current federal kind of imposition on DC and the tense relations between local leaders and federal leaders.
So moving forward, what do you think that we as residents can really expect in the coming days from the impacts of this tragic shooting?
So I think we'll continue to see, clusters of National Guard, likely accompanied by a DC police officer. As I mentioned, I think a lot could potentially be subject to change this week, depending on what we hear from in that federal court case. I'm also going to be keeping a close eye for court records that are filed against the suspect and see if we can glean anything more about his potential motivations, or, allegations from prosecutors about why he drove across the country to carry out this attack. But I think in a way it's, speaking to members of my community, I think people are feeling additionally on edge, but those are also feelings that were present before Wednesday's tragedy. Because as I mentioned, it's been at this point like many months of visible National Guard presence in DC and these kind of the surge of federal law enforcement. So I don't think there necessarily are new emotions, but maybe for a lot of people, they're heightened emotions.
I mean, when the announcement was first made about the National Guard being deployed here, this was back in the summer when we were going through an awful heat wave. This was the fear that I articulated, right? That tempers were hot. It just was going to take one person doing something, one person popping off or hurting somebody, and all hell was going to break loose. Is that this?
That's an interesting question, and one I don't know if I'm best positioned to answer. I mean, I guess it's important to emphasize that in the wake of Wednesday's tragedy, it was very much an isolated incident. We didn't see, people on either side like taking to the streets about that incident. It hasn't appeared to inspire other bad actors, and I hope that continues to be the case. From public statements that local and federal officials have made, they have very specifically and clearly defined it as like a lone actor, a one-off incident, a tragic attack at that. But it's hard. It's still hard to say, I think, what the kind of lingering repercussions of the tragedy will be.
I know Trump has really been keen to use crime as a reason to roll back DC's ability to govern itself and things like home rule. Do you have any sense of whether or not this further jeopardizes DC's autonomy and things like home rule?
So, like I mentioned, we still, there are a lot of bills moving through Congress that would chip away at various aspects of DC's autonomy and quite fundamentally change aspects of its legal and criminal justice system. I'm sure that in the days and weeks ahead, when some of those bills, go to the House floor for a vote or are being discussed by subcommittees, I'm sure we will see reference to the attack on Wednesday be made and probably be used by some lawmakers, as an example of why this kind of tightening grip of the federal government is necessary. I'm thinking that there's on Tuesday, there's a subcommittee on a bill that would effectively form a committee in the executive branch of the government focused on crime and immigration issues in DC. That will be discussed on Tuesday. I'm sure we'll see reference to Wednesday's attack then. But I don't see any signs that kind of the flexing of the muscles by the GOP and by Republicans in power, I don't see any sign that is going to slow that those attacks are going to be diminished in their frequency and in their kind of force.
Olivia, thank you so much for being here and honestly covering all of this. If you find out more information, please come back and let us all know.
Will do. Thank you again for having me.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.